The fun part about covering crypto is often the wackiest story could be the right one. Or at the very least, there's always some wacky story happening that you can be covering.
Welcome to the Crypto Playbook. This is the inaugural edition, Bitcoin Then and Now. I'm Jeff John Roberts, finance editor of Fortune magazine.
And I'm Leo Schwartz, reporter covering crypto at Fortune.
So Leo, for our new listeners, what are we doing here?
Well, I think a lot of people might be surprised why the president is talking about crypto seemingly every week. Of course, Bitcoin, the first and biggest cryptocurrency, is above $100,000. So a lot of people are coming into crypto for the first time. And at the same time, a lot of people in crypto might not really know the history of the industry and what's led to this point. Bitcoin was the birth of the crypto industry back in 2008 when a shadowy figure named Satoshi Nakamoto introduced the cryptocurrency with a white paper. So now it's been nearly 20 years. Bitcoin has gone fully mainstream. It's above $100,000 now, and it's attracting people from crypto denizens to BlackRock and major financial institutions.
Yeah, I've covered Bitcoin since 2013. I first encountered it in a New York City park where Wall Street traders were buying it with $100 bills out in the open air from crypto anarchists, and it's obviously evolved a lot since then. But one thing I can't stress enough is this Bitcoin didn't exist, and it's now grown to a market cap of around $2.2 trillion. And put that in perspective, that's what Amazon's worth. That's bigger than Facebook. That's bigger than Tesla. So I think we have to kind of tip our hat to Satoshi for creating this thing out of nothing that is everywhere. Regardless of what you think of it, there's no denying Bitcoin is a force in the world. It's bigger than many major currencies. It's bigger than most companies. And I think at this point, it's clearly here to stay.
I mean, Bitcoin, I think the most interesting aspects, it was really created in the wake of the financial crisis as a response to the centralization of how finance was happening, to banks really controlling the means of how money travels around and being so interconnected with the government. Bitcoin was really a rebellion against that. And what's been so fascinating recently is that Bitcoin has become embraced by the government. I mean, we even have the Trump administration announcing a Bitcoin strategic reserve. So I think it's really an avenue for exploring both the society, the American society and the international society's approach with money, and also how capital is criminalized or how it's accepted by the government.
Yeah, and that's what I think makes Bitcoin so cool. It is the story of money and a new currency storming onto the scene, but it's also the story of, human culture and society and politics. And I just can't stress enough to how much it's changed. As you point out, the idea of the government creating a Bitcoin reserve would be unthinkable even 5 years ago. And in the early days, pretty much the government didn't know or care what Bitcoin was. And then when they noticed it, they wanted to stamp it out because it was so tied up with criminality. And that's, I think, that was Bitcoin's reputation for a long time. This is something sketchy for criminals. And frankly, for good reason, because it was a great tool for early criminals. But for a long time, it's not really been that way.
You've been covering crypto for longer than me. It's hard not to see the same constant narratives happen. The really colorful characters, which can be fun to cover, but also exhausting. And of course, the amount of criminality. I mean, crypto is both adopted by money launderers and drug traffickers worldwide, not to say other types of money aren't either, but it's also used as a way to scam people constantly, or used as a kind of penny stock or investment vehicle that charlatans in the past would have used through different types of methods. So I think it can get tiring, but of course that promise is still there and it's only getting more and more mainstream every year. I'm curious, Jeff, you were one of the first reporters at a mainstream publication to start covering it. What first caught your eye about it?
Well, I was just doing it as a tech story, as a tech reporter at the time, and I think that's also an important thing to remember. Bitcoin and blockchain are essentially a technology, a transformative one. And around the time, we were covering the arrival of ride-hailing apps and flash sales and, Instagram, and Bitcoin sort of bubbled up as another tech thing around there. But I think, what caught my eye are just extremely colorful people, because I've met some of the very worst people in the world covering this technology, but I've met some of the very smartest people as well, too, people with really big ideas who take privacy seriously. But I think it is fair to note that Bitcoin grew out of a very libertarian culture. There was a group called the cypherpunks of the Bay Area who were exploring using privacy, who were privacy obsessed and were looking for a private form of money. So Bitcoin just didn't arrive overnight. There was a lot of sort of stalled attempts at this, and Satoshi was the one who got it right.
I've always felt it's a little ironic that we think about Bitcoin in terms of its fiat currency value, again, considering it's supposed to be this alternative. But I think a lot of skepticism comes from the fact that Bitcoin, more than anything now, is really viewed as an investment vehicle for people and a way to accumulate wealth. Whereas when Satoshi created it, it was also supposed to be a means of payment, a way to be able to send money without the government tracking it. And I think there's also that tension between whether Bitcoin should be thought of first and foremost as an investment instrument, or whether it does have some bigger promise for being able to upend how payments works.
Speaking of Satoshi, I think we'd be remiss not to ask who is Satoshi.
Well, I get an email about once a week from an anonymous person saying that it's Elon Musk.
Oh, you get those emails too?
Yeah, so I'm going to say Elon Musk. Why not? I think the fun part about covering crypto is often the wackiest story could be the right one. Or at the very least, there's always some wacky story happening that you can be covering. Jeff, you wrote the seminal book on Coinbase, which of course is one of the biggest crypto companies, the most important US crypto company. And I know that you had a section that was sort of investigating what the leading minds think about who Satoshi is, which is still somehow a mystery. So what's your best guess?
One of the most famous people is Hal Finney. He is a legendary computer programmer. Hal Finney unfortunately passed shortly after Bitcoin began circulating broadly. And after that, he had his body cryogenically frozen, which, is sort of put in a jar. I don't know how exactly they do it, but it's the sort of thing where, in theory, he can be kind of defrosted and brought back in the future. And when he is, the thinking is that one reason he's into Bitcoin is so that he'll have some money to spend in, 2170 or 2250 or whenever he comes back into the new world where Bitcoin's the primary currency. But there's another guy named Nick Szabo, and he is a sort of a polymath who, I think he's a lawyer, he's a computer scientist, and has grown up in both the U.S. and Europe. And there's a lot of evidence pointing to him because he and Hal Finney worked closely in the early days. And you could always ask, why doesn't Nick Szabo come out and say, "Hey, it's me"? Because you would be crazy to do that, because you'd have every government and every criminal at your doorstep right away. So but I'll play along and say, let's just wish Satoshi well. He did it. He built the impossible. And it's one of the most impressive technological feats and social feats of the last century, in my opinion. On that note, I suppose it's probably time to welcome Jack.
So Jack is one of the most prominent executives in crypto in general. For the same reason as a lot of other founders in tech, he's very young. I think now he's 31 years old. He's been in the industry for a long time, and he really came to prominence as one of these young wonderkind founders. In this case, he created a wallet for holding and transferring Bitcoin called Strike. I first learned about Jack when I was covering El Salvador, the Central American country, adopting Bitcoin as a legal tender 5 years ago. And Jack was actually the person who introduced the president of El Salvador, Bukele, at a Bitcoin conference to make the announcement. And it really shows how central Jack has been to that Bitcoin community for many years. He's one of the most vocal advocates for Bitcoin. And now he's taken on this new role as the head of a publicly traded company that will be holding Bitcoin and innovating around Bitcoin. It's a new approach that a lot of companies are doing, basically holding Bitcoin in their treasury and allowing people essentially to speculate on that through publicly traded vehicles. So we're going to talk about his own journey in Bitcoin, why he came into it in the first place, how Bitcoin is different from other assets, as well as how his own role has changed in the business world.
Okay, well, good luck with the interview, Leo.
Jack, thank you so much for being the first guest on our vodcast. It's very exciting to have you here.
Thanks for having me, and congrats on the podcast, man.
The first episode is on Bitcoin, and we were thinking about who would be best to talk about the history of Bitcoin, as well as being very relevant in how Bitcoin has evolved and where it's at now. There wasn't someone better than you, so very excited to chat with you about this.
You're going to make me blush, Leo. Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
And I also feel like your video setup is legendary on crypto Twitter with the empty shelves in the background. You're often in this setting, right?
Yes, the empty closet. It's a happy accident. Like all great inventions, it's blossomed as a meme on the internet.
Never thought to put some hats in there, some clothes, some Bitcoin clothing?
No, I think it serves a purpose in a message that I would never be able to put into words. I have my own thesis in that America has become so hyper financialized, and the job of the American consumer is to do exactly that, is to consume. We are the other side of the world's factory in China, or maybe the cars in Germany. And so I found this closet as maybe the greatest visual example of the over-consuming, hyper-financialized American, where when I toured this place, it was Gucci bags and Louboutin sneakers. And so when I did my first interview, the first day I moved in here, and everyone was like, is this kid at the time trying to change money out of an empty women's wardrobe the size of an apartment? And I said, you know what? I am going to work on Bitcoin in the middle of what used to be full of Gucci bags. And so that's the reason. And I think that's why it's such a powerful meme.
Wow, I didn't realize there was symbolism behind it, but I'm happy to have learned that.
Yeah.
First question for you. Would you consider yourself a Bitcoin maxi?
Yes.
What's the pitch for Bitcoin, and why is Bitcoin different than what has evolved into crypto over the past almost couple decades?
On the notion of history, I think the world should know that Bitcoin maxi and the term Bitcoin maximalist actually wasn't coined and founded by Bitcoiners. It was founded by Vitalik Buterin, the creator of Ethereum, almost to give a negative connotation to those that could only fathom valuing Bitcoin as the money they believed in. And so it was used as a diss and as an insult. And in classic internet fashion, we absorbed it and turned it on its head and said, you know what? We'll take that as a compliment. I think the notion of being a Bitcoin maximalist is that money is meant to be won in a market. So just taking a step back, Leo, money is the market good that you don't consume. It's the unique market good that you actually acquire to save and later exchange for the things you want. So money is the technology us humans invented to solve for barter. So before money, Leo, you would have to have done this podcast and exchanged this literal podcast for dinner tonight. You'd have to find a butcher that would take your podcast recording for a couple steaks. So we created money. And so naturally money wants to be won. Can you imagine if we had 10,000 different ways to exchange our time, our energy, our effort, our labor? If I walked into Chipotle and said, hey, I have the Subway coin, and they say, oh, no, we take the Chipotle one. Money wants to be won. It wants to be the one market good that allows us to price, save, and exchange all of our efforts in society. And so a Bitcoin maximalist is someone that believes that Bitcoin is the best money, the best market good at achieving the properties that money is supposed to accomplish within the marketplace. And that is to be hard. You've probably heard this term hard. Hard is in reference of how hard is it to make more. If I were to work all day and night and exchange that effort for money and someone else could print it, then that's not very fair. It's easy money. It's easy to create more of it. So the money needs to be hard and scarce. It needs to be divisible. It needs to be transferable and portable. It needs to be easy to store. It needs to be easy to verify the difference between fake money and real money. And so Bitcoin maximalist is someone that believes Bitcoin achieves all the monetary properties that us humans need the technology to achieve and have. And it is the best at being money, and it is destined to be the one money. And so I don't take that as an offense. You know, when someone says, yuck, you're a maximalist, you know, us Bitcoiners said, you know what? We are. Because according to basic monetary theory, money wants to be won, and the market ends up electing the best money based on very clear properties. And yeah, you know what? Fine. Call me a maximalist if you want.
In a lot of crypto, you have people coming into it for lots of different reasons. Maybe you think the technology can upend the financial system. Maybe you're just trying to make a lot of money. I think Bitcoin often does tend to be different, maybe because it was the first and was born out of that white paper with those very strong principles and ideology, where you do believe that it can become this currency. And I'm curious, I imagine the first day that you learned about it, you didn't immediately come to this belief. So I'm curious what your own journey was with learning about it and then growing into this belief that Bitcoin would someday become the world's one currency.
Yeah, well, I guess, you know what's interesting, Leo? I got into Bitcoin when I was 18 years old from my father. So I also have a unique perspective in that I'm a millennial, and barely a millennial, by the way. I was born in 1994. And so I think, listen, debt to me is a form of borrowing from your future in a very exaggerated manner. It's a form of time travel. You're traveling to the future to take the time and energy and resources of some future tense and future generations, and you're bringing it to the present to spend it now. And so to me, what I've learned in Bitcoin is the creation and printing of money is an ethical problem. And those that monopolize and print and allocate capital on behalf of others, there's a moral violation there to have spent future generations opportunities and time and energy to provide a level of indebtedness that is impossible to overcome now for the American people. So I would say what Bitcoin has become to me and many others is not just computer code or not just an asset, but it's moral code. Bitcoin has very simple moral code, which is you shall not inflate, you shall not confiscate, you shall not counterfeit, or in more simple terms, thou shall not steal. So for me, Bitcoin is very ethical and moral in that way, and that we all have the same rules, we all have the same access, and it is a moral idea. It is a philosophy. It is an idea expressed in code that operates as a network that is realized as an asset. But, as a millennial growing up and understanding Bitcoin, I realized that it is an ethical way for my generation and us as young technologists to engineer, the future that we want to be a part of as we're swimming upstream against decades of, policy decisions that have robbed us of our future.
So how soon was it before you decided to actually build a company around it? Was that first company Zap?
Yes. So what I did after I dropped out of college was I enrolled in some coding boot camps. So my dad, for all the parents out there, picture you have a college dropout son that's lost, has no decided future or no direction. You say, you're going to get into this Bitcoin stuff with me because I'd rather you do that than dwell in the basement and play Xbox. So I would wake up every morning. We would go to boxing class together, just get outside, sweat a little bit, and we would learn about financial markets and Bitcoin to the point where I got into computer coding. So I wanted to be able to understand the code. I wanted to be able to contribute to the project. And I was never the trader my dad is, but I was a chess player. I was a nationally ranked chess player. I had state championships as a kid. And we thought, well, chess and coding, maybe there's some similarities there. And I enrolled in a coding boot camp. And so through teaching myself to code, going to these one-off boot camps, which hilariously don't even exist anymore, I developed an ability to contribute. My career story was really just this evolution of finding my way to support Bitcoin. I had really understood it as a moral imperative to help create a money that was fair to all humans and create that market good that we can exchange our time and energy for. Eventually, I got to the point where I felt I could start a business and provide real value to customers. And that business is technically called Zap Solutions. We're known for Strike. And it was Bitcoin Financial Services. But that was probably halfway through my career. So if I got into Bitcoin in 2013, Zap became a real business. 2019 maybe is when I went from contributing to open source developers through donations and grants to employing them. And we launched Strike and announced it in 2020.
And I think your career also helps, and the different products that you've worked on also helps explore this tension in Bitcoin, which is basically between this promise it initially had as a different form of peer-to-peer payments and an alternative to traditional payments, or whether it functions best as a store of value, as an investment, as an alternative hedge against inflation, which I think is how the vast majority of people see it now. But I know that you have worked a lot on payments, and I think over the past few years, we've talked a lot about in your own business, whether you're seeing more adoption with or ability of Bitcoin to serve as an actual tool for payments versus as a store of value. So how have you thought about that, I guess, over your career, but especially over the past few years?
Yeah, I would say, my business with Strike and now 21 as well, it's really, seeing the forest through the trees for me, in that for me, Bitcoin has always been the opportunity. That's what Bitcoin's going after, is an ability for humans to create value for each other and then be able to save it, take it with us tomorrow, and then later exchange it and build a better future. And so the forest for the trees is my businesses have a hyper focus on Bitcoin. And for Strike, it's Bitcoin utility. is that, no one was building Bitcoin payment services. No one was building Bitcoin lending services. No one was building Bitcoin wallet services. All these companies were focused on 300, 500, 1,000 different asset classes. And so we've seen growth in all different factors and facets of Bitcoin utility because we are now the leader of serving, Bitcoin financial services around the world. I would say that the store of value is the dominant use case by a long mile. And that just comes down to, one, the mere desire and demand for that solution around the world. Every single currency is going through rapid debasement, even the United States dollar at this point. And so the need to have something that is performant and protects your effort, your labor, your time, your energy, and affords you the things that you're going to need in your future, like a house, like an education, like food, like travel. Bitcoin is a solution accessible to everybody.
I think one of the issues with Bitcoin, one of the reasons that you've seen other solutions come onto the market, from Litecoin to Ethereum to Solana, is that it can be very slow and expensive to transfer. There are limited transactions in a block. So I'm still curious whether you think it could actually at some point be this form of peer-to-peer payments.
I think absolutely, of course. And in many aspects, it is. One of the challenging things about Bitcoin is it's all of ours and none of ours at the same time. No one's in control. No one gets to determine what it is, but it's all of ours, and that we all have access and we all use it. And so, if you ask some of my customers in El Salvador or some of my customers in Africa, they'll have no idea what you're talking about. They're like, what do you mean? We use Tether, we use Bitcoin, we pay each other. I would never use the Naira. But, if you ask some of my customers in Texas or in Florida or in California, they'd say, yeah, I would never spend my Bitcoin. Why would I do that? It's going up 60% a year. Have you seen its CAGR? Have you watched Michael Saylor's last keynote? And so I think definitions matter and who you're talking to matters. But I would say absolutely. I fundamentally believe Bitcoin will serve as the most efficient and effective payment rail, and people will use it as currency someday. The other thing, Leo, is that altcoins in their nature are inflationary. So the notion that we want a money that's fixed in supply, that no one can print and debase and inflate the time and energy and effort of us humans. That's what we all want. The notion that we're just going to create millions of different tokens and coins flies in the face of that as well. So I find it super illogical. It doesn't make a ton of sense unless you're someone that is trying to monetize and sell and make money on the tokens that you made in your basement or with your venture capital funding or whatever.
You mentioned your work in emerging markets. I think the first time I learned about you, really, I think besides when you were doing some integrations with Twitter, was when you very famously introduced the president of El Salvador, Nayib Bukele, at the Bitcoin conference. I think it was 2021, right?
My name is Nayib Bukele, and I'm president of El Salvador.
When Bukele announced that Bitcoin was going to be adopted as legal tender in El Salvador. And now Strike has established its global headquarters in El Salvador. So I know a lot of your work is looking at the impact that Bitcoin can have in emerging markets. I mean, can you talk about how that came about, maybe starting with your work in El Salvador and where you view that promise of adoption?
Yeah, so it's a great story on the back of using Bitcoin as a payment rail, because I bought a one-way ticket to El Salvador to pilot our product in early 2021. So Strike, we closed our seed round April 1st, 2020. I'll never forget it. The best April Fool's joke was when the money landed in our bank account. We couldn't believe it. And then it took us about a year to actually build the product. And one of the products we wanted to build was cross-border payments. If I could move physical value instantly and for free anywhere in the world, then all I had to do was connect it to, foreign bank account and domestic bank account, and I can make cheaper, faster cross-border payments. And not only that, Leo, but I can enable a new market of remittance, because a lot of $10 remittance payments, $5 remittance payments, they're priced out of the market because the fixed fees make them uneconomical. If your minimum fee is $50, you can't remit anything lower than $50. And if you wanted to remit $51, your fee is 99%. And so it unlocked a market for people that had migrated to America, were maybe bussing tables at a restaurant, really low income hourly jobs that had a little bit of cash that they needed to get home. El Salvador was a great market for that because it was one of the most popular remittance corridors to and from the United States because it was one of the most dangerous countries in the world. So there was a lot of immigration, people leaving the country to find more prosperous, healthy jobs and living in income in, let's say, South Florida, for example. And then they're trying to get the money back home, and they're trying to get back a tiny amount. And it was really impossible for them to do that. So I bought a one-way ticket to El Salvador to pilot this product. We launched the product. We turned out to be one of the most popular apps in the country shortly after our launch, so much so that I got a DM from the president's brother on Twitter. And I met them, and obviously it turned out to be really good. And they talked about this vision that they had of, almost like the Latin American Singapore in a way. They wanted to be really tough on crime. They wanted to be really clean. And they wanted to focus on hard money. They wanted to relieve themselves of being the dominant controller of currency and, really punishing savers and biasing borrowers. That's what our current financial system does. And they figured that if they had a focus on technology and a focus on hard currency, that not only would the country prosper in the fact that, their Bitcoin reserves is almost $1 billion. They've been able to negotiate new deals with the IMF. Their GDP growth has been off the charts. Tourism and outsiders coming to visit or move there off the charts, real estate market off the charts. But they'd also attract a lot of new business and innovation.
I think it also brings up this other tension that we have now in Bitcoin, which was, it was founded, as you've said, in the wake of the financial crisis, as this idea that you could create a currency that wasn't controlled by institutions, that wasn't controlled by the government. And now you have a lot of governments start to embrace it, from El Salvador to increasingly the US government. I mean, the Trump administration really embraced crypto during his campaign and has since been, Trump himself has been launching his own crypto companies. How do you view that tension between trying to keep it independent and now really working hand in hand with governments to adopt it themselves?
What I would say is, Bitcoin doesn't need you. You need Bitcoin. And to me, that's a very, powerful form of expressing the idea that to say that Bitcoin is working with Trump, I think Trump's interest in Bitcoin is because Donald Trump needed to win an election. Donald Trump needs to find neutral reserve assets in the face of what's becoming a weakening dollar, global trade wars. So to me, Bitcoin has always been and always will be a protocol, and it's there for anyone to use and buy, whether you're a government, individual, emerging market, most powerful country in the world. Going back to this code of ethics and morals when it comes to money, it is no one's job to determine who's allowed to or not allowed to use money. But the key insight is that Bitcoin wasn't waiting for any government to adopt it, and it didn't need any government to be successful. In fact, governments are going to find themselves needing Bitcoin. And so whether it's to win an election, whether it's to close a deal with China, whatever the case is, it's going to become increasingly valuable as a tool.
Increasingly, we've seen new financialized tools pop up, like the Bitcoin ETFs, where you can buy it on a non-crypto exchange like Charles Schwab. And now we're seeing a new plethora of instruments, which are these publicly traded companies that are holding Bitcoin, and you can buy stocks in them, and that would basically be exposure to Bitcoin. I know that's something that you're working on now with 21, which is your new project. So Can you just give an overview of what 21 is and what this new idea is of people being able to basically get exposure to Bitcoin, not just by holding Bitcoin itself?
Yeah, so 21, a part of our mission and our goal is to be the best way for the capital markets to participate in this Bitcoin story. What makes us uniquely different than an ETF is we're an operating company. So we're founded as a Bitcoin business with a core goal of increasing what we call Bitcoin per share. So it's obviously a riff on earnings per share. But we think the real hurdle rate and the real thing that any company or business should be measured against is, are they accretive in Bitcoin terms? Are their shareholders getting wealthier in Bitcoin? So for example, in a hypothetical sense, Leo, if you buy a share of 21 and you become an investor, let's say your share represents 0.05 Bitcoin per share. And we're able to go out, and whether it's raising capital through a convertible bond, whether it's launching new products and new partnerships, bringing SoftBank into Bitcoin, we grow that Bitcoin per share metric from 0.05 to 0.06 to 0.07 to 0.08. And that allows shareholders to passively grow their exposure through Bitcoin through no other effort of their own besides just being a shareholder. Whereas an ETF, let's say you have 0.05 Bitcoin's exposure in the IBIT product, that will actually just go down over time because they charge you 25 basis points a year to hold that exposure. And they're not an operating company in a business with a leadership team that's outgrowing, the Bitcoin on the balance sheet in accretive terms. So what we've realized is the level of institutional demand and the appetite in the capital markets to participate in Bitcoin is profound. And we think we've put together a vehicle that's very attractive because of the founding group, because of our mission, because of our technological capabilities, because of the capital we're already coming to the market with.
But do you think there's any contradiction or irony compared to Satoshi's original vision of now being able to have exposure to Bitcoin by getting it through a publicly traded stock on the NASDAQ or NYSE?
I don't actually. Again, I think money is one of the rare tools that we all have to use. And, unless you're one of the rare groups of humans that still barter, but, it's akin to water, is that a functioning society demands a good money. And so it is for everyone. And that everyone includes Wall Street, that everyone includes the fixed income markets. In fact, arguably more now than ever. This bond bear market, so now I'm getting a little bit financially technical here for the audience, but bonds have performed, worse than they ever have in the recent years. And the government's indebtedness and our fiscal situation is a huge problem. The stock market has been hyper financialized and hyperinflated because it's been used as a savings account. And there's been a lot of volatility. Trade wars affect it. Trump administration making all sorts of decisions that are reordering capital flows. And some of the biggest capital pools in the world are looking for what we call real returns. So something that can protect their purchasing power. And so there's a lot of capital trapped in certain, whether it's fixed income, whether it's the capital markets that are looking for exposure. And so what we figured is we would put together a vehicle and a business that solves that problem.
Last question. I think I have time for one more. I think it's one of the great enduring mysteries in technology and financial history that we don't know who Satoshi is. Jeff and I were talking about this. I mean, do you think it's even worthwhile to speculate on who he or they is? And then even if you don't, what's your theory?
I don't think it's worthwhile. The most important piece about who Satoshi is it doesn't matter. That's the best part. Satoshi could be, go through the mental exercise and pick your Satoshi candidate and live through if it's them. And the point is, who cares? They don't have any outside influence. They don't have any control. And the project has grown much larger than them. And so one of the greatest gifts Satoshi gave to all of us is they walked away. The one thing, Leo, they ever asked was that they wanted to be left alone. Out of respect for someone who innovated and created such a gift that I value, I go out of my way to honor that and leave them alone. And so I don't want to know who Satoshi is. I want to respect their one ask to me and the rest of us. And at the end of the day, if we end up finding out, it doesn't matter.
So we're confirming it wasn't you at 13 years old.
It definitely was not me. I wish I was that smart and that capable, but I was playing video games and picking my nose. I was not working on cryptographic solutions to solve humanity's largest problems.
Yeah, only 5 years after that.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for taking the time. This was great. Really appreciate it.
Yes, likewise, man. Congrats on the podcast again. It's an honor to be here.
Well, Leo, that was an interesting sit-down you had with Jack Mallers. I'm curious, what struck you most about what he had to say?
Yeah, well, we talked at the start of the episode about how almost religious a lot of Bitcoiners are. And I think it's a very different perspective than what you get in crypto today, where so much of the industry has really been subsumed by Wall Street and by traditional finance and by people talking about wonky concepts like tokenized stocks and stable coins. The Bitcoiners really as a community believe in this asset as a revolution that can change how global finance works, to not have it be owned by a single institution or government. And I think hearing Jack, you really get that almost spiritual, religious, and certainly philosophical approach to what crypto can be.
Yeah, but these people like Jack are almost an endangered species. When I first started covering it in 2013, nearly everyone was like Jack. It was like covering sort of a religious revival. People really believed it. In one sense, it was sort of more fun too. There's something kind of romantic about it. And, of course, since then it's Bitcoin and crypto going mainstream has let it succeed beyond their wildest dreams and driven the price of Bitcoin up to, over $100,000.
Yeah, it's certainly gotten much less strange. You see a lot more suits at conferences. The US government has embraced it, but I love when you have someone like Jack where you ask an innocent question like, why are the shelves behind you and your recordings empty? And he has this deep philosophical explanation for it about, the waste of the dollar and American spending. So it's nice to know that still exists in crypto.
Well, everyone, that's Bitcoin. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Jeff John Roberts.
And I'm Leo Schwartz. See you next time.
This was the Crypto Playbook, a podcast by Fortune Magazine.
This episode was produced by Jaylon Ursoy and edited by Ellen Estev. Fortune's art director is Ariel Ray. Executive producer is Lydia Randall. Fortune's head of video is Adam Bannicky.
Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.